Hi YouTube, this is Angie the Anti-Theist. I need a break from Rick Warren, and maybe you do too. Today I want to talk about the fact that I did not choose Christianity. I've said before, and I'll say many, many times again, that I think brainwashing children, indoctrinating them, baptizing them into a religion, when they're too young to understand these things, when they're not being presented with a full range of alternative options, when there is great moral imperative placed behind the decision, it is an unfair situation to put a child in. Children are completely dependent on their parents. Children cannot provide for themselves. They cannot make their own food. I was 3 when I gave my heart to Jesus. I was way too young to be thinking about these things. My son turns 5 next week. I don't talk about religion with him, really. I've told him, that some people believe in Jesus and some people believe in a God called Allah, and, that mommy doesn't believe in those things, but that he can figure it out when he's older, and we'll talk about it when he's older. Because he's not old enough to make these decisions. His brain isn't done growing yet. Religion is emotional, it's got moral issues, it's got laws, it's got all kinds of codes of conduct, dietary restrictions. Religion is not a small thing. Maybe it is for some, but if you take it seriously, it's not a small thing. It's a major imposition and structuring of someone's life. To make that kind of decision for a child, to bet, to be so sure that you are right in Pascal's wager about which God it's going to be, who's got the afterlife plan, that you're going to make that decision for someone else. Because that's what Sunday school is. That's what catechism is. That's what taking your children to the mosque every Friday is. You are indoctrinating them into your religion because you are so sure you're right that you don't trust your child enough to make that decision for themselves. I think if I'd been given the full range of religious choices, full range of deities to worship from, or not, if atheism had been on the table, I very well might have picked it first. I remember when I was 4, coming across the passage in my little children's NIV about how no man can serve 2 masters, and I had the blasphemous 4-year-old thought, why do I have to serve a master? Can't I just serve myself? I think it was destined for atheism if destiny can be said to exist in any way. I didn't choose God. I only chose him in contrast to Satan. My options were God, who I was told was all good and all loving, but basically could do whatever the fuck he wanted, or Satan, who in my teen years I discovered really only did bad things to me when I let him. I mean, I sinned a lot as a teenager because rebellion was all mixed in there too. So I would go out and do things, and then there would be consequences to those actions. But I could pretty much tell that they were the consequences of my actions. You get really drunk and dehydrated, you're going to have a hangover the next day. Or at least I was. Satan didn't do anything to me that I didn't open a door for, whereas God could and would do whatever the fuck he wanted as part of his grand cosmic plan that was higher than my ways, and therefore I wasn't supposed to be allowed to question. I think there was so much emphasis in my particular family on thought control, on not having blasphemous thoughts, on having God be the Lord and Master and all this other stuff, then I spent more time worrying about not having ungodly thoughts and less time about doing, teenage things, unchristian teenage things. I was more worried about my thoughts being in line than my actions because, by my teen years, I'd really found this message of grace. Hedonism totally covered. All I had to do was repent sincerely, and Jesus had already paid the price for all of my sins, and since I believed him, and I was already going to heaven. I really didn't have a compelling reason. Now, I did feel tremendous guilt, but that guilt didn't override my biological imperative to go out and get freaky every once in a while. That guilt did not override the fact that I was horribly, horribly depressed and trying to self-medicate with street drugs. That guilt didn't it didn't help. It didn't make me make better choices. It didn't help me to lead a more godly life or a more moral life. It didn't help. Christianity has not been good for me. I wouldn't recommend it to someone else. But as much as I love being an atheist and I encourage people to think for themselves, question their moral teachings, question their religious teachings, question the scriptures and who wrote them, as much as I encourage that, for people old enough to think about these things, and yes, teenagers are old enough to think about these things, but 4-year-olds and 3-year-olds and 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds, they're not. They think literally. You tell them about a hell with a lake of fire, they're gonna think a lake of fire. Kids don't think in metaphor very well until a certain age. They just don't get it. They see it as literal. You tell them that the moon's made out of cheese, they think the moon is made out of cheese. And if you tell them that Jesus is the Son of God and he died for their horrible, awful sins of being born, they'll believe that too. Not because it's right, not because Jesus is talking to them, but because children are sponges and they believe and trust their parents until they're taught not to. Everybody on YouTube, have great godless days. Respect your children. Trust them enough to make good choices. Give them the tools they need to do so. And try to be good parents. Peace.